Over the weekend, everybody was putting out there from the NFL Combine. This is what I'm hearing about the Steelers quarterback situation. And great articles. I did not put mine out because I was more excited to share with you guys what everybody else was saying and then what I have heard on top of that. And the biggest name that has emerged in the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback carousel here is New Orleans Saints QB Derek Carr, who the Steelers are reportedly waiting to see if he is released, clearing up. I believe his cap hit in New Orleans is like 52 million bucks. For the Steelers, if they traded for him, would be $30 million. And if they released him, obviously that completely changes. But apparently the Steelers are waiting to see if he's released before they move forward with anybody else. That was the same situation with Matthew Stafford. It appeared to be the same situation with Aaron Rodgers at a time, waiting to see if he was released or what was going to happen there. All of these things have been settled. Derek Carr is expected to stay in New Orleans, although you never know what's going to happen. And GMs say things all the time, and then something different happens. I mean, Omar Khan literally said both he wants George Pickens to be great in Pittsburgh and that the door is open for Najee Harris. If both of those guys are gone this offseason, Omar didn't lie. Things just changed, and they changed pretty drastically because he's not going to sit here and say, yeah, we're probably going to trade George, and I'm not even going to talk to Najee, man. Have you seen that guy? Not my running back. That's not what they say. They're save-face people. These are save-face situations. Derek Carr is an interesting name. Does not raise the bar in my eyes whatsoever. I think he's better than Russell Wilson. I think he's better than Aaron Rodgers. I think he's a better option than a $50 million a year Matthew Stafford. I think he's better than Daniel Jones. If you release him and you could get him for 25 million bucks and say, come to Pittsburgh, and Justin Fields already said no, cool. I'm on board with that situation. I think Sam Darnold is a better option. I think Sam Darnold is probably going to go for significantly more money than $25 million a year. And because of that, I don't know how on board I am with Sam Darnold, although everybody has been saying all week that the Steelers could still be in on the Vikings quarterback. I have heard that the Steelers could still be in on the Vikings quarterback. I've also heard that Derek Carr is certainly a name that they have some interest in. Now, all this being said, the Steelers quarterback prediction is very simple. It still remains very heavily Justin Fields, and it will not change from Justin Fields. I believe, just from having conversations, both on and off the record, that the Steelers and Justin are pretty squared away. Like, they are both in a spot where it's not Justin wants to test the market and Justin wants to go out there and get a massive paycheck and Justin wants to go to the Jets and he's interested in these other teams and the Steelers are being cheap and the Steelers are looking at Derek Carr and the Steelers are still considering Russell Wilson. And no, I believe that when you break it down very simply, the Steelers and Justin Fields are trying to figure out terms of an agreement, that they are sitting here saying, how much money do we need? How many years do we need within, this contract to make this money work, this opportunity for you work, this opportunity for us to work, and it doesn't screw anybody in the process? How do we lay all of that out? This is a quarterback negotiation. It is way more intense. It involves way more dialogue, and it involves way more positions and the future than just, hey, let's just sign Deebo Samuel for $15 million or T. Higgins for $35 million. This is the guy that make or breaks our franchise for the next 2 years. How much are we willing to pay him? How big of a risk are we willing to put on our hands? That's where I see the Steelers and Justin Fields, that they are maybe not super close on a deal, but they're not sitting around calling Sam Darnold's agent and Matthew Stafford and everybody else with like real heavy conversations about where things are going, that it is still very much so Justin Fields. I've also been told, again, this is conversations both on and off the record. This is not sources. This is just conversations, dialogue, things that you are hearing in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, that I'm not totally sold Russell Wilson is like in the top 3 right now. I kind of believe that the Steelers have to keep Russ here. They got to dangle the keys a little bit and say, don't worry, you're still part of this. But at the end of the day, they would go get a different option. They would probably go after a Derek Carr or a Sam Darnold or maybe an NFL draft pick before they went Russell Wilson in this scenario. And if it's worst case scenario, you got to bring back Russ. Obviously, that's okay. But they're not really looking at Russ as the guy. They're looking at Russ as like a fallback to the fallbacks where we stand right now. I'll lay out my QB prediction after this, but first I want to give you the floor. Any thoughts on Derek Carr and or everything I just said?
Yeah, Derek Carr's name popping up is not something I had on my bingo card, first and foremost, because you looked at that contract and you sit there and you say, man, you definitely aren't trading for that. And the Saints are so non-committal on what they're going to do at the quarterback position. I mean, they've been that way seemingly since Derek Carr got to New Orleans, that you just have no idea which way the wind's going to blow down there in Louisiana. But if he was to shake loose, the way I see Derek Carr is yeah, sure. If you're in the mindset that you're going to draft a guy and you want that guy to be your future, but you're not ready to start him in week one. And we both have agreed that there's barely one quarterback in this NFL draft that you would be comfortable starting in week one of the 2025 season. So if you bring in Derek Carr, it's literally Mitch Trubisky part two, just a couple years later. That's literally how I view him, because yeah, he's a guy that has had upside in the past, but he's a guy that doesn't have very much left on the bone. So he's a veteran that you're going to bring in. You're going to hope that he can coach up, whether that's a Jackson Dart, a Quinn Ewers, a Will Howard, and you hope that those guys pay off in the long run. But even in that instance, whenever I look at this year's draft, I say, if that's the plan, if that's what you want to do, it's much better to push it off and do it next year, because the caliber of prospect is just higher. And it's a deeper class in my eyes. And I think that there's names in that class next year that we haven't even heard of, and they're going to come out of nowhere, similar to how a guy like Kyle McCord went from being a nobody to now all of a sudden being a mid-round pick because of one stellar year in Syracuse. So Derek Carr is interesting. I think mainly just as a Mitch Trubisky part two. And again, starting from scratch for the fourth year in a row since Ben retired is not interesting and not appealing to me.
No, I agree. I think that the Steelers could look at a guy like Derek Carr and say, hey, here's a 2-year deal. We'll play you this year. We'll play you next year. And then after that, whoever we draft, whether it's this year or next year, should be ready to go. And there are names in this draft. You know what I mean? Like, I think Jalen Milroe is a guy that a team's going to take a chance on. And they're going to say, let's see what happens. You know, maybe he stinks, but he's probably got more upside than almost anybody else in the middle of the draft here, and maybe anybody else in next year's middle of the draft. I'm not saying Jalen Milroe would be a top 10 pick next year. I'm just saying that Jalen Milroe would still probably be viewed the same exact way because of how talented he is, but how much development he has in front of him. I agree with you with Derek Carr. I kind of agree with most of these guys. Like Sam Darnold, you're not going to get Sam Darnold as your future quarterback in Pittsburgh. That's just not happening. You have too many things. You have too many contracts. And to be honest, Sam Darnold doesn't fit what you're looking to do. Mike Tomlin says quarterback mobility 11 times a year, and Sam Darnold's never ran the ball in his life. That's not what you do here. I'll lay out my quarterback prediction here for 2025. This is what I believe the Steelers are going to do. I think they go sign Justin Fields. I haven't changed my mind on that since. I believe we were one of the first people to say the Steelers want Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. That's just, nothing's changed. I've talked to some people. I've called some of our members and have had conversations about the quarterback position, and they've asked, like, hey, like, has anything changed? Why is everybody talking about this guy or this guy? I'm like, that's just because that's something to talk about. And these guys, obviously have to draw up something to talk about. We have to draw up something to talk about, but we've always stayed strong and nothing's ever changed, that it's still Justin Fields. Like it's been Justin Fields. The Steelers remain looking at Justin Fields. That's my quarterback 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. My QB2, I believe, is a draft pick. And if I had to guess who the Steelers are eyeing up right now, like everybody's talking about Will Howard, who, yikes. You want to talk yikes at the NFL Combine. Did you see Will Howard's performance at the Combine? Yeah, that was rough, man. And people are saying like I saw Shedeur Sanders kind of defend this guy. And look, I'm not about online bullying in any way. I don't think everybody should have attacked Will Howard, but it's also at the same time, like, you could acknowledge you were passing on air, dude. and it wasn't. Didn't look good, and it should have looked better.
Maybe his mechanics were messed up from when he was thrown over parking garages at 2 a.m.
Wait,
I don't know.
is that a real thing?
I believe McAfee talked about that on Friday. Yes.
Wow, they should have just played that tape. I'd be way more intrigued with that guy if
But
you
at the
were
end of
just
the
like,
day, he does have his pro day, so there's room to make
yeah,
up.
yeah.
He has the national championship behind him too, so I'm sure he'll be fine.
Look, nobody's looking at the NFL Combine going, that's the reason I'm not going to draft that guy.
Yeah.
Like you're still fine. Everybody talks Will Howard. I talk Jalen Milroe. The Steelers definitely have interest in Jalen Milroe. They like Jalen Milroe. Jackson Dart's another name that they met with. My guess is Quinn Ewers. My guess is Justin Fields, Quinn Ewers as your 2, and most likely a Skylar Thompson as your 3. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers brought in another quarterback, whether it's an undrafted free agent, another like real low ball veteran. If they went out and got a Kyle Allen, if Kyle Allen doesn't sign anywhere else and they just go, all right, let's just bring him back as our QB3 and make Skylar Thompson our QB4. But I if I had to guess, my prediction is Justin Fields, Quinn Ewers, maybe a veteran, Skylar Thompson. You know what I mean? You don't have those. You have a lot of conversations about Justin Fields. You have a lot of conversations about the combine and the players there. Nobody's sitting around going, what do you think the Steelers' interest is in Skylar Thompson as a QB3? You think they really like him as a QB3? Nobody has any idea. Mike Tomlin barely knows this guy's first name. He just knows him as the only quarterback we have on the roster. That's my prediction for QB1 and QB3. Justin Fields, Quinn Ewers right now. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a different draft pick, but just to pick one out of a hat, I'm going Quinn Ewers. That satisfy you as a Steelers fan?
It's an interesting direction because they've always wanted to have a veteran on the roster. And even Skylar Thompson, he was in the same draft as Kenny Pickett. So it's like you're going with 3 very young, very inexperienced, I guess, outside of Justin Fields, quarterbacks for your roster, not just this year, but probably going forward for the next couple of years. And maybe that classifies as interesting changes because the thought process at quarterback was always, well, they brought in Mitch Trubisky because he's a veteran. Well, they kept Mason Rudolph on because, well, he's been around the block here a couple times, and he's been around since 2018, 2017. So maybe that's the interesting change, is that they are going pure youth and pure upside and pure potential at the quarterback position, which is something that, Mike Tomlin has not done. I mean, considering the fact that he had Ben Roethlisberger for the first 15 years of his career, it was easy to not go in that direction. But, he has swung and missed for the last couple of years since Ben retired. Maybe that's the interesting change, is that he sent him saying, listen, let's take the safety blanket out. Let's take the veteran safety blanket out and run with a bunch of young guys and see if we can coach them up. And that shows, if they do that, I will say this to close this out, that shows a lot of faith in Tom Arth, which I'm kind of interested about.
Yeah, me too. To be honest, me too. And I think that they like Tom Arth. I like Tom Arth. I've heard great things. I've never once heard a bad thing about Tom Arth. Like, he is so respected around the NFL. And I'm ready to lean on that. I'm ready to see what comes of that. It's not, you want to talk about an interesting change. That was the interesting change a year ago, is they went away from these veteran quarterback coaches, or Matt Canada, who was like clearly a Rooney hire, and just said, like, okay, let's bring in the guy that really does have like offensive coordinator upside. And I think that's huge. I could see it happening. I think it's time for that. I think it's time for the Steelers to adjust from there. Hey, we need veterans. Just say, screw it, let's take some flyers. Let's hope these flyers work. They're all flyers with upside, maybe outside of Skylar Thompson, but even him, he's started more playoff games than anybody else on the roster right now, or anybody else who could be on the roster in 2025.